Welcome to Sovereign Finance, the show that connects the dots between personal finance, global finance trends, and deep human history. Tune in every week to demystify the money puzzle and protect your interests in a turbulent world. Welcome to Sovereign Finance. I'm your host, Rob Drummond, here with Derek Dearden. How are you, Derek?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ron.
Good. We're going to do a bit of a roundup on this episode, and we're about 16 episodes in now, maybe around there. And we thought for anyone joining the conversation at this point, we wanted to revisit why we're doing this. Why is this worth tuning into every week? Why should you subscribe to us on Substack and join the conversation? Back in maybe the first episode, we shared a quote from Martin Luther King, who said that nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. The ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence over that by the good people. The time is always right to do what is right. The question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate or for love? So, Derek, I think that was worth revisiting.
Well, of course, the main context we were thinking there is that the ignorance and stupidity of the way that the banking system and the world finance system has been successively eroded is prime example of, if you like, also, I think that in the 6 months or 7 months that we've been producing these episodes, I would say things in the world have become more and more. There's still a large majority of the general population who are either not perceiving it or not believing that they have any control over it, or that saying anything would be of any significance. So this is even more pertinent than when we were looking at it. And also say a word or two about the title that we've given to this series, Sovereign Finance, and why we use that word. I mean, one of them is that there's quite a significant conversation out there in public sphere about sovereign money or just money as an alternative to the increasingly unjust systems of money, which are really becoming more and more oppressive and clearer as being a form of expropriation of the assets of the population at large into the hands of a small elite. So also there's the concept of personal sovereignty in terms of being responsible and accountable for our own lives, which of course an important part of that is our finances, rather than being at the effect of the actions of other people. And actually it's very interesting because this is really also at odds with a sense in which the word sovereignty is often used. It's often used in the context of entire nations. And we're talking about the nation having sovereignty rather than the rest of
So you think of the sovereign?
Yes, I mean, it comes obviously from the sovereign, the ruler of a nation. But there was a lot of rhetoric about sovereignty at the time of the Brexit referendum, for instance. And a lot of people were really exercised by the idea that we were being at the mercy of faceless bureaucrats in Brussels by being in the EU, which was not entirely an invalid point of view.
Yeah.
But it ignored a great many practical advantages of being within that union. Anyway, that's one example. And of course, in the last 8 months or so, a lot of rhetoric about Israel's right to defend itself, as though Israel was a thing, as distinct from all of the individual human beings who are being massacred on one side or
It's a very
another.
interesting turn of language where it absolves any one individual from responsibility from what happens.
Exactly, exactly. And of course, to the extent that an advantage would be for independent countries to be in charge of their own affairs, it's an absolute myth anyway in the present world. We live in an integrated world, and there are dominant actors on the international scene, and we all have a pretty good rundown of the way that that works in reality. So, but and that um, that triggers a thought. I don't know whether you've seen any reference to a book. I think it was written about 10 or 12 years ago, called The Most Dangerous Superstition. And this superstition is the idea that we need rulers at all. And
That's almost the basis of anarchy, isn't it? And they deliberately demonized the term anarchy to mean chaos, and that isn't actually what it means.
no, exactly. It means devolving decision making to the lowest possible area. There's a catchphrase for it, the principle of subsidiarity, which is obviously a very valid principle. And in fact, what we lose sight of is that until very recently, in practical terms, that was what happened. You know, the medieval kings may have had nominal complete sovereignty over their entire nation, but they had very little capability to know what anybody was doing anyway, and definitely not very much control over actually how people conducted their day-to-day affairs. And the fact is that the number of psychopaths and sociopaths who are prepared at whatever cost to take advantage of the rest of the world is a very small proportion of the population of the world as a whole. And it's only because they have been much better at bamboozling the rest of the population into either not noticing the extent of imposition on everybody else that their behavior is representing, or believing that the rest of the world, believing that the operation of those in charge, whoever they are, whether they're kings or emperors or popes or bureaucrats, they've managed to be quite successful in persuading large numbers of the population that without them being in charge, things would be much worse. Whereas the reality is that 99% of the people could regulate their own affairs, their own families' affairs, their own communities' affairs, their own districts' affairs, without anybody bossing them around.
Well, we've recently had the UK election, and this has been the main question on my mind: is why do we even have this party system? Like, why are they not just independent, representing the people of their constituency?
Yes, exactly. It's true. I think I've just thought yet again the phrase reductio ad absurdum crossed my mind. Reduction to absurdity. It's got an everyday ring to it, you know, that things that happen in the world are beyond the satire. But there is also a technical meaning of that term in formal logic and in mathematics, whereby it's a kind of proof, and you prove something by first of all assuming the opposite, and then you develop from that opposite until you can prove that 1 = 0 or x equals not x or whatever, which is manifestly false. And therefore that proves that that proposition that you started with is incorrect. And so its opposite must be true. And I think if you look at the way that things are unfolding in the world right now, you see that in all kinds of areas, and the finance system is one of them. So what are those kind of big picture views are one area that we'll be covering in these podcasts. Another area is specifically information about the principles of personal finance, about how you keep track of it, how you manage your incomings and outgoings, what your long-term plans are, what actions would be in line with those long-term plans, and how you put systems in place to do that. And in a way, this is applied common sense, and it's blindingly obvious. And it's so obvious that, I almost feel embarrassed in spelling it out. But it's actually not obvious to any of us, and it's certainly not something which is part of our education. You think we typically spend 13 years in education or 16 years in in the case of probably half the population now. And there are a few things that are absolutely critical to having a satisfactory life, which somehow or other don't get mentioned at all, even though a day or two's serious examination of them would probably be quite enough to give you clarity. I mean, one of them is obviously finance. Another one is nutrition.
I was just thinking about, I don't remember being taught how to grow food.
No. And another thing, of course, is just health generally, a balanced life, what it takes. I mean, it's not rocket science to realize that some exercise is better than none, or that you need certain elements in your diet in a certain balance. And as I say, you could learn that in a day or two. And yet somehow we go through 13 or 16 years of education without actually getting to the point of having a grasp of that. And in a similar way, the essence of personal finance and also um, personal finance in a way is a microcosm of business finance. And the same principles apply to both. And I mean, just to summarize, the key elements are, first of all, ensure that your income is greater than your outgoings. And secondly, do something constructive with the difference between the two. With those two statements, pretty much sum it up. And then the way that you track that, the three kinds of financial statements, the cash flow report, the profit and loss account, and the balance sheet are what covers it. And if people had an understanding of that, I think they would probably immediately see through the ludicrousness of using GDP, gross domestic product, as a measure of prosperity and well-being, because it's essentially a flow. There's a cash flow statement writ large, rather than a
It's a singular
statement.
point, not the whole thing.
Yeah, yeah. And so we cover that, and as I say, we also cover how that would relate to you if you do any kind of entrepreneurial activity. And of course, it doesn't even have to be a business when I say an entrepreneurial activity. Any activity where people are coming together and trying to achieve something, even if it's a charity or a um, or a hobby society or a sports club, the same principles apply. You're not going to stay in operation unless whatever you're expending in whatever form is slightly more than matched by the resources that you're drawing in to do it with. And that feeds on to the so-called science of economics. And we'll be taking a critical look at that. We'll be seeing we're all subjected to a lot of rhetoric about it. I mean, ever since Margaret Thatcher started selling off the nationalised industries, which, there were some valid arguments for. I mean, government bureaucrats don't make terribly good entrepreneurs or even terribly good business executives. But the idea that we're better off by having competition as a dogma is entirely questionable. Uh, People quote Adam Smith as though he was some kind of deity. But if you actually read The Wealth of Nations, you'll see that what he was saying was, first of all, quite sensible. And
He was quite wary of corporations, though, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was indeed. But his idea of a marketplace was very different from the sort of abstract concept of a marketplace that we have foisted on us at the moment. I mean, for instance, we've supposedly got competition between all the electricity companies. uh, the
No,
fact is
they're
only
all protected industries. That's why they make so much money, because they're so well
well,
protected.
they're essential, of course. I mean, people need food, they need housing, they need clothing of some sort, and they need energy. And if they and we also, of course, need water, which is a particularly sore point. So if those are effectively monopolized or oligopolized, then we're all over a barrel. Anyway, so but I just wanted to finish that point I was saying about Adam Smith. He was saying that the marketplace allocated resources in the best way, and that's the
That was
justification they
his
have,
invisible hand, wasn't it?
the invisible hand of the market. But you've got to bear in mind that the context in which he was saying that, when he talked about a marketplace, it was a literal marketplace where people met, where they could
They could
compare the
freely move
price of.
about as well. Like you can walk from you can walk from one side to the other. If what you have here isn't needed, you can easily go to the other side.
Yeah, yeah. And if somebody's selling potatoes that are more expensive or lower quality, then you find another trader. But people all knew each other. Um, they knew that if they were flagrantly dishonest in their dealings, that everybody would know about it and stop using them. And indeed, that was even the case with the stock market, and until the so-called Big Bang. Um, until then, the stock exchange was a real market. It's had 2,000 members or so. They walked around the trading floor and uh, and traded with each other. And
What was the Big Bang?
the Big Bang was the name that, well, of course, it's confusing now because once again it's gone back to its original meaning from in cosmology uh, of the purported beginning of the universe. But the Big Bang was a nickname given to when uh, stock trading went over from person to person dealing and trading hands on a deal, and then going and getting the paperwork sorted out to close the transaction, to the time when it was all done in real time on computers by people sitting in enormous offices behind computer screens, trading with people that they never met and never expected to meet. All that has come out of that. But another aspect, so we'd be looking at, economic dogmas. What is the underlying thought behind them, and what is actually rather more questionable about them?
Just on that, I'm currently reading Understanding Power by Noam Chomsky, and he argues that the neoliberal models of economics that are taught and broadly accepted bear no real relation to reality, and the way that the most prosperous companies generally are in protected industries, but we applied a free market model onto developing countries.
Yes.
But it's a different story here. If you look at the defense industry and so on.
Yeah. Okay. Finally, a big missing from economics is any conception that we actually operate within a finite world, or a world with finite resources, finite amounts of energy, finite raw materials. And that didn't actually matter 200 years ago because we were operating well within the envelope of what was available. But which brings us up to various aspects of what is peculiar about the particular period of history that we're living through. And I think this is really an epoch period in human history because uh, literally over the last few decades, we've reached the limits of the availability of easy extraction of all kinds of minerals. I mean, it really doesn't matter how much is the total amount of copper in the world, but the raw fact is that 100 years ago you could still find streams with nuggets, sometimes enormous nuggets of raw copper in, and surrounding them would be very rich ores very close to the surface. And if you've looked at any images of copper mines, you'll find they're enormous, great holes in the ground going down hundreds of feet uh, to carve out the tailings of rock, which is now sometimes as little as 1% copper ore. All that has to be dragged up to the surface, ground up, processed, purified, creating an enormous amount of pollution to get the tiniest bits of copper out. And of course, we're also seeing it with the exhaustion of fossil fuels, the easy pickings of coal that was just below the surface soil are long gone, and the mines are getting deeper and deeper and in more and more remote areas. And similarly with oil wells, initially when the first oil was exploited, it was a matter of drilling through a few tens of feet of rock and finding a deposit which was under pressure and would be squirted up to the surface merely by the pressure of the gas above that oil. And now we're needing to drill down literally kilometers into the ground or under the ocean bed and expend a significant amount of energy in pumping it up to the surface.
Using energy to get energy, isn't it?
Exactly. And it surprises me, first of all, with how little real planning there is for what is inevitably going to come now within decades, if not within years, or if not within months, to make a transition to the reality of not having the availability of those huge quantities of energy. So those are two of the things which are very peculiar: the exhaustion of raw materials and the exhaustion of energy. And of course, going back to the exhaustion of raw materials, a lot of the proposals, such as they are, about transitioning to renewable energy are entirely fanciful in terms of what they would take. I mean, the idea that we're going to replace 4.3 billion petrol and diesel vehicles with 4.3 billion electric ones is simply absurd. The notion of being able to generate electricity without the coal or natural gas or oil that we use to power the power stations, even to replace the electricity usage we have, is fanciful. Much less that we could build enough power stations to also replace the energy which is going from petroleum products into vehicles.
And yet they won't look at nuclear. I don't know what your stance is on that.
I think nuclear has its own problems. I mean, perhaps I don't know whether we want to go too far off track. The notion that nuclear would solve the problem is ridiculous. The number of nuclear power stations that would have to be built, the economics of nuclear power have been grossly distorted by the fact that the plutonium, which is one of the byproducts, has a ready market for nuclear weapons. They're enormously expensive to build. They don't run for that long. We haven't really got an accurate costing of the true cost of decommissioning them at the end of their lives.
It comes back to using energy to get energy, doesn't it?
It comes back to that, yeah. And once again, we're talking about finite resources in terms of uranium or any other fissile material that you might power these things from. But on a positive front, I believe this is a solvable problem, but it's simply not solvable in the terms of most of the, if you like, official elite conversations about it.
No, I think what it's good at, I mean, my stance is that there is plenty of energy. We need to learn how to harness it. I think the 2030 goals and the net zero stuff, I think is just going to make energy unavailable to people who need it. I think it's going to freeze people.
Exactly. All the energy that powered the Earth over geological time is really the energy that is streaming in from the sun. And we have high quality energy arriving by sunlight, the same amount of energy being dissipated into space from the dark side of the planet because otherwise it would either get hotter and hotter or colder and colder. So those two must balance. But the difference between them is that work can be done. And of course, the energy is harnessed by green plants, which feed themselves, and they feed the entire food chains that depend on them. And we have technologies that can harness that. And of course, some of those technologies are very high tech. They're relatively expensive. And once again, they depend on finite resources. But there are plenty of engineering solutions on an accessible way. And I think there's very exciting prospects there for bringing the more poverty-stricken parts of the world up to speed with having a much more satisfactory lifestyle, harnessing, if you like, low tech or intermediate tech or appropriate technology or whatever name you want to give it, devices which could be constructed in local workshops, which could provide a thriving local economy and provide people with refrigeration and air conditioning and labour-saving devices. You know, some electrical generation on a modest scale to run communications systems.
To be sovereign does require affordable energy, which is the point.
Yeah, yeah. And the final aspect where we're running into reductio ad absurdum is, of course, within the realm of finance itself, which is the main focus of this series, and we'll be looking at the particular ways that if you like, the confidence trick of banking has managed to become greedier and greedier and greedier until it's now reached the point of being completely self-negating. So watch this space. We're living through exciting times. One other thing I'd finally like to say is that we have got a space for comments on Substack, haven't we?
We do, yes. Yep.
And we're not getting very much in the way of commentary there. So if you're listening to this, or if you go and review some of the other things, or you listen into some of our future episodes, or if listening is not your preferred way, you prefer to read it, we've got transcripts on each page, haven't we, Rob?
We do, yes. They come out at the same time.
You know, if you agree with us, we'd like to hear it. If you disagree, we'd like to hear why you don't agree.
And if you've got a question, ask it, and I won't answer it, but I'll ask it to Derek.
Okay. And if you've got a question, we'll almost certainly cover it on a future event, or if we don't answer it there and then on the thread. Okay.
Very good. Okay, well, let's leave this one here. Thanks, Derek.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Sovereign Finance. For more episodes, transcripts, in-depth articles, and community, please take a minute now to subscribe free at sovereignfinance.substack.com. See you next time.